Hey everyone, welcome back to the second Unit 42 Threats Unpacked session. It's been a while since we had the first one, but really good to do it again with my very good friend and colleague Anna Chung. And we have a really good and special guest to join us in this session. We have Doug Witschi from Interpol, and Doug would be sharing some really interesting things from Interpol side of things. And we Unit 42 have been collaborating very closely with Interpol, and we wanted to have this opportunity to have Doug come in and share some of the things which we have been doing, but at the same time also what Interpol has been doing. And without further ado, I'll let Doug introduce himself and share a bit about his work at Interpol. Over to you, Doug.
Vicky, Anna, thank you so much for the kind invitation to speak here today. Look, excuse me, I can't speak highly enough about the partnerships and relationships we have with Palo Alto. Excuse me for a minute. Must be a bug. Look, Doug Witschi is my name. I'm the Assistant Director for the Interpol Cybercrime Threat Response Capability. And obviously, we are very much dependent on the fantastic relationships and the work that we do with Palo Alto around the world. And I'll talk about some of those today. So thanks, Vicky.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Again, we really appreciate you, giving us the opportunity to have you on this platform. And, the first thing I wanted to cover is around BEC, the threat around BECs, right? Business email compromise has been hitting organizations globally, and there's a lot of impact. But unfortunately, BEC has become such a norm or such a common threat that it doesn't get the limelight in the media. I just wanted to cite, FBI's IC3 report, which was published a while ago. The recent report, again, just to make it clear, the IC3 report is predominantly US-centric. These are cases which have been reported to the FBI, right? But it's one of those reports which is quite in-depth and detailed, and I don't think there are any other reports which are coming from any other countries which goes to that level. But I think it is an interesting report where we can get some kind of patterns which are vendor agnostic, where threats are being reported to the government, and it is being published by a government body. Here I'm referring to FBI. So when we looked at the IC3 report, of course, in the past 2-3 years, specifically the past 2 years, we have seen ransomware really getting a lot of attention. Of course, even in the previous Threats Unpacked session, we covered, ransomware, ransomware as a service, what is double extortion ransomware, and really, ransomware has been all over the news, right? But when we looked at the IC3 report, and when we look at the losses, actually BEC goes far beyond than ransomware. Again, I'm not going to make a statement here that it is global, but predominantly BEC still are leading right in the front. And again, the impact, at least for US, which for the cases which have been reported, is almost 2.5 billion, 2.4 specifically. So it's a huge number. When we compare this to ransomware cases which were reported, it is just over $500 million. So there's a huge impact which is being, huge. There's a big threat from BEC cyber criminals, which is impacting nations and organizations globally. So when we look at BEC and when we look at Unit 42's work, Unit 42 was formed back in 2014, and we started really reporting on BEC criminals, how they have evolved. And over the years, Doug can share a bit more, but we actually have been collaborating with Interpol, and we have had several successes most recently, which I wanted to discuss on, is Operation Falcon 2, which resulted in 11 arrests nationwide in Nigeria. And when we published about it, we even had a joint release with Interpol. But just to get into some of the specifics, 11 is a number which is quite high when we look at in a single operation when we have so many arrests. But when we look at really those specific individuals, these are key members who have been really kind of providing assistance to other cyber criminals, other BEC actors. But these are actors who have been very active over the years. They have been providing platform for other criminals. So these were really the top guys who have been really amplifying the BEC threat globally. And it is such a, it was, we were humbled to see this result. And again, it was not only a single entity. Of course, we were one of the private sectors which contributed, but Interpol, the Nigerian Federal Police, and 6 other law enforcement agencies globally who worked together on this. So it was great, and I just wanted to discuss that. And over to Doug, I just wanted to share, or even get your thoughts around this and how this operation played out. Of course, we can't share too many of the details, but whatever we can.
Well, look, Vicky, that's so true, and really Falcon 2 really was born off the back of the hard work of the various analysts and researchers across Palo Alto and Unit 42. I guess how it all stemmed about. We undertook an activity in November 2020. As a result of that, we took out a number of a couple of targets around business email compromise. And this group also was linked into other sort of cybercrime activity. But as a result of the analysis of this network and obviously the engagement with Palo Alto, we obviously extended the network significantly around about 460 identified targets through an organised group that had been labelled and named Silver Terrier. And as a result of that, we started to sort of join the global collaboration or bring the various countries together to start to have a discussion with Palo Alto, obviously playing a significant role as part of the planning, as well as the coordinated response in relation to this activity. Now, look, yes, we have taken out some key members of this network. It's far from over from my perspective. We need to keep fighting the fight and taking the challenge up to these criminals at every available opportunity. I acknowledge the fantastic work that was undertaken by the Nigerian police force in relation to the response and obviously meeting our requirements and needs. They did a terrific job in getting people around the various regions in Nigeria to be able to disrupt this network. And it was a good international collaborative effort that included not only law enforcement, but private public partners like Palo Alto through that. And really Palo Alto was very much the architect of the activities and the operations around this network. So it was a really good outcome. And we're hoping that we can actually progress a number of other initiatives based on what we found through those activities, and then obviously trying to extend the disruption factor as best we can against this organised crime network. So it's a key one of many operations that we have undertaken over the last 2 years, but it has had some very key successes around this type of issue.
Great, yeah, absolutely. And just to amplify your thoughts around the authorities in Nigeria, they did a phenomenal job. And over the years, when I've attended conferences, we discussed about BEC threats. And many times, we have seen comments in the industry that it is very hard to get an action out of Nigeria. There has been cases which have been reported, but a lot of countries have their own challenges. But now, really looking at how the law enforcement there in assistance with Interpol and working together with Interpol have taken this as their priority and really getting these guys. And, as you said, it is far from over. There are so many more individuals who are still on the radar. It is very exciting really to see. And again, thanks to the Nigerian Federal Police in executing this. So yeah.
Yeah, and look, I think Vicky too. It's look, the cybercrime thing's obviously an emergent crime type. It's when the internet sort of opened up in the late 80s, you had the young hackers that were trying to make a bit of a name for themselves. They've developed and obviously they've morphed into this. But really, what we're seeing it as a significant organised crime activity now into the last decade, and obviously to the current day. As a collective group of law enforcement, global partners, and people, and I guess to the whole community, the cyber community, we actually need to come up with new ways of doing our business and thinking outside the square in relation to how we can disrupt and how we can mitigate the harm that these criminal networks are causing many, many people around the world. And I think for us, we need to persist. We need to be dogged in our determination and focus. And we need to sort of look at new ways to be able to deliver the outcomes and protect our global community against these types of threats. So for me, it's, yes, I know we've had challenges in the past. We continue to have challenges in engagement sometimes, but that doesn't mean we give up. That doesn't mean we sort of just sort of say it's just too hard. I think every day we need to be trying to push the boundaries, being agile in our response and being creative in coming up with new strategies and new ideas. And really it's the flavour, the experience and the capacities and capabilities of private-public partners that can add to that flavour and obviously make us a lot more effective than what we have done traditionally in law enforcement.
Absolutely.
Doug just made a really good point, and he mentioned about the young criminals, young generation of criminals using new tactics and tools. And so for us on the defense sides, we also need to come up with smarter ways. And I want to shift gear a little bit and ask Doug and both Vicky and Doug. For example, for researchers, especially younger generation of researchers or researchers who hasn't really been involved with helping law enforcement, can you kind of give a bit of guidance or general overview? How are things we could do to better help law enforcement around the globe, both like locally and internationally? What are things we can do to kind of contribute to that effort?
It's interesting. I'm involved with a range of different groups in Asia specifically. I'm part of a group through the Meetup group on Div Zero in Singapore. I get to meet some amazing young minds, both in the startup group through I-71 with the National University of Singapore here, which I help mentor occasionally, but it's obviously got a link to law enforcement. But these smart minds come up with some amazing ideas. And really it's about, I guess, having a conduit into sharing those ideas with a broader community. I encourage law enforcement and particularly the practitioners in cybercrime to get out there and obviously connect to these types of groups. And I'm not saying that, my contacts and my networks are at the most ideal. I know we have to balance it against the work pressures and work-life balance and all those types of things. But, just to illustrate a few examples of some of the amazing things that have come across through discussions I've had with young tech. And there was a security incident globally. I'm not going to be specific in relation to the region, but a significant security issue that saw a lot of harm being done. It was very much focused on terrorism. And fortuitously, I was out at an event and I was talking to a couple of young white hat hackers. And they were talking about the event. Obviously, it was getting global news. And they'd actually started to look at what they could collect and what they could analyse through that event in those activities. And what they actually did was they were able to actually determine, I guess, the devices that some of the threat actors in that instance had been using. And they were able to track and trace through the open source information in some really creative and interesting ways. Now, this is a layperson looking at a significant security problem. And they came up with different ideas to be able to sort of obviously track and trace threat actors, and obviously brought that information to myself, and we shared that with the member country concerned. I mean, that's just one example of the many different ideas, and quite often I get stumped on some of the technical issues, and I still look for new ways. And by sharing that threat, and we do it more from an open source perspective, you know, we come together and we come up with new ideas and new potential tactics that we can apply to this threat. And I think, you know, we've seen from a cyber criminal perspective and these organised crime networks that they're very agile, they're very creative. You know, when I brief cybersecurity, I'm really encouraging them to keep an open mind, because what we've seen time and time again is we get blindsided, whether it's the SolarWinds attack, you know, supply chain. It's these things are starting to emerge, and we've got a range of new threat activities and a broadening threat environment like cloud computing, you know, 5G, 6G. We've got, you know, issues of AI, machine learning, quantum computing, potentially, all these other types of issues, IoT devices, for example. You know, it provides some new opportunities for cyber criminals to exploit and take advantage of victims, you know, generally being unaware. From a response perspective, we need to be as agile, we need to be as creative, and we need to come up with new ideas. And if you're working in the industry for a long time, unfortunately, you walk a path. You know, whether it's defined by a playbook within an organisation, you walk this path, and sometimes you're not thinking laterally. What I find with the young people is they're looking out there. They're chatting, pushing the boundaries, and sometimes they come up with great ideas that we can actually use in our efforts and our activities to fight this crime.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think Doug put it really well. And in addition to that, and with some of my experience working with really young minds just coming out of colleges, you know, who have been really good at CTFs, won championships, and they want to contribute to the work, to the mission of, you know, working with law enforcement and also, you know, what private sectors like us we are doing. So there has been an, you know, just not too long ago where a guy, you know, we are talking about BEC, and this individual, he just started working on, you know, how this BEC campaigns work, and he was able to attribute one of the campaign to a threat actor. And what this individual did was he created, because he was good in offensive security, he created a malicious script and sent it back to the threat guy. So his intention was right, that he wanted to do good, but at the same time, he was probably breaking a law in the victim's country, right? So I just wanted to highlight that we got to know where the boundaries are, right? So just to do good, if we start hacking back, and this is where I think it is very important, and I've been a very vocal proponent of against it, because as soon as we start looking at hacking back, it will be the wild, wild west. You know, good people will start breaking laws and all that. But, you know, these things are possible in collaboration with law enforcement, with court orders, and law enforcement takes the charge. And this has happened. This has happened in multiple countries, and I think that is the way. But just for me to give a few tips that yes, to the young guys, even if you can, don't reach out to your local law enforcement agencies, share your skill sets, reach out to people like us in the industry, reach out to people like Doug, whether it is Interpol or your local law enforcement agencies, and say what you have and work together, because, you know, that way we can do a lot of good. And the other thing which I want to highlight is a lot of times you may get discouraged by people in our industry, maybe in the private sectors, where they'll say, oh, you know, you are going to spend or waste your time because law enforcement work takes long. You know, this I've heard for many times in my career over the years. But it is so important that yes, there is a need for that. The law enforcement engagements, you know, there is proper processes which needs to be followed. It does take time, but when the result comes, it makes it so much more easier for the follow-up cases. So even, the cases which we discussed, one of the cases which we discussed with regarding BEC and the collaboration which we did, just talking about cases many years ago, it took longer, but now things are becoming so much faster. So I would say also have patience. Don't hear about the naysayers. Collaboration is key. A lot of people have been talking about private-public partnership, but this is happening. Just continuing this discussion from BC, but when we talk about actions, you will see just very recently, Microsoft in collaboration with private sectors like Palo Alto Networks, Unit 42, and various other private sectors, they were able to take down the Zloader botnet. Zloader, it has been there for a long time. Predominantly, it started as a banking Trojan, but now it has been used as malware as a service. And again, this whole botnet have also been utilized by ransomware actors. We'll talk about ransomware in a couple of minutes, but you see the impact of all these threats, like the botnets and their ability to provide their platform to other criminals. Is like, these people are collaborating within themselves, botnet operators, ransomware operators. That's why they're able to do so much damage, right? Losses are in multi-millions. Sometimes, when we talk about it in totality, the number is not, it's hard to fathom, but it's definitely into the billions every year. So, actions are there. Collaboration is key. Talking about the Zloader botnet takedown, it's a work which spanned for more than a year, right? And one of the actors have been also arrested in the Crimea region. This is one of it. The other one was raid forums, and I wanted to ask Doug on his perspective on the takedown, but basically raid forums was taken down. Raid forums is one of the hacker forums which is an open forum where many cyber criminals or would-be cyber criminals have been involved in buying, selling credentials, tools, a lot of things, nasty stuff have been happening on that forum. But the other side of the story from our industry peers, we have also heard that, because it was taken down, a lot of the intelligence which they were, kind of creating on actors have also been lost. But it's a thing which needs to be discussed further, because it's important to take action, because if we just leave it out there, these platforms are going to provide opportunities for many other cyber criminals. So again, actions are being taken, which is a great sign. And Doug, just your thoughts around, again, just before I said that, I hope the answer which I gave to Anna was okay, and also Doug's. But just over to Doug, what are your thoughts on these forums being taken down? I know there is some intelligence which there may be a gap for a while, but I'm sure that can be worked out.
Look, there's always a balance, Vicky. I think it's a hard call. I'm sure that the authorities that were behind that takedown, obviously made a judgment call in relation to this. But there's a couple of things that I guess I would like to flag. One, this crime type cannot be solved by a nation. All right, it cannot be solved by a nation. It'll never be solved by a nation. Unlike transnational and organised crime, where there's linkages to various countries that are involved in the network, and bilateral and multilateral engagements with those countries will usually be able to disrupt this network. This is so much more significantly complex than anything that we face on a global scale. Cybercrime is the true global crime. And as such, it needs really a global response. And whether that's a law enforcement or a judicial process, and arguably due to the volume, I think it's going to be difficult to arrest our way out of this problem. But, I think the private-public partners and all that need to be actively involved in this process. And Vicky, you mentioned the Wild West before. I've been using that as a bit of an analogy of late too, just to highlight cybercrime. I think there's some very grey areas in the global environment, and I guess national policy and legislation, unfortunately, does provide some protections when you think that 13% of countries don't even have policy or legislation. As such, the legislative mechanisms under international law cannot apply. You cannot arrest someone in a country where there's no reciprocal legislation in that country. So that pretty much invalidates a law enforcement response in the first instance, but that doesn't mean law enforcement stops there. We need to look at different ways and different solutions to disrupt this type of activity. And obviously, infrastructure is one, looking at the networks and how we can actually sort of cause them a bit of concern. You flag the forums, look, the forums obviously inspire and generate cyber criminals, particularly on a technical basis. But you have to also look that there's a lot of cyber criminals that have no technical basis whatsoever. They pay for a service, a cybercrime as a service type of activity, and they start to, obviously commit whatever the arrangements are with the network that's providing that service, some sort of cybercrime that's targeted to meet a personal need, or maybe a personal vendetta, or maybe some other rationale. I think cybercrime is one of those insidious activities that unfortunately is going to get worse before it gets better. And I think what we need to do is continue to define and build new relationships, new partnerships across the willing organisations and countries, and strive to really focus on mitigating the harm for all people that are connected to the virtual environment. As new people come online, they are vulnerable because, the scams and the activities that, many of us see on a day-to-day basis and we've grown to ignore because we know it's rubbish, whether it sits in your junk or in your inbox, from an email perspective, we sort of look at it and go, and we basically ignore it. New people don't, because they haven't been exposed to this prior, and they can potentially be at a greater risk of being a victim. And we saw that during COVID because we had a lot of people come online for the first time and obviously fell victim to a range of different scams and processes as cyber criminals. So we've got to actually look at redefining our ways and methods to deal with this global crime type, because, what we're currently doing, we're walking a path, but we need to start to sort of really push the boundaries and see where we can take this.
Sure. And yeah, just to also add that, while these takedowns have happened, that doesn't mean that, the guys behind Zloader are going to sit back. They'll try to, bring their infrastructure back. But again, just pushing back, putting the pressure on these guys, making it more expensive for them to come back is the key here, and being persistent, right? So again, when we talk about look at the Raid Forums takedown, we have seen some other actor trying to, start a similar forum. So there will be operators going to that forum, but again, is that persistence of law enforcement, private sectors to really continue hitting them is really key here. Just going to Anna. Anna, any thoughts around this? You want to add anything?
I think throughout my years of experience in deep and dark web, it's true, like Doug made a really good point, that the existence of underground forums, underground marketplace really enable less technical threat actors to enter the market, especially in terms of ransomware. We know the business model of ransomware as a service. It really allows threat actors to, simply register in the underground forums, create accounts, and then use the other people's portal and generate their own ransomware variants, and then encrypt large amount of victims. And even in some of the really advanced portal that we have seen, they can keep track on the infections percentage and keep track on the status of the victim. Have they paid enough? So on and so forth. So I think like breaking and disrupting that kind of communications and collaborations will kind of increase the uncertainty between threat actors. It's almost like partner of crimes, isn't it? Like, so we can kind of increase the cost of building trust, increase the cost of conducting a really successful cyber intrusions or ransomware operations. Those are things we need to take into considerations. And I think those are really important efforts that deserve a lot more attentions. And then when threat actors try to duplicate those efforts and try to build another marketplace, another forums in marketplace, it will kind of, give them some sort of potential obstacles, thinking they can just replicate what previously happened, and then making it harder and harder for them to build the trust, and making them believe it's harder and harder to conduct cyber threat attacks, and then further stop them or prevent them from trying to start another illicit business out there.
Right. And I think I heard ransomware a couple of times there. So just shifting our gear a bit, and let's talk about ransomware. I know, we even on the previous session, we discussed quite a bit about what has been happening in the past 2 years, why the prolific rise of ransomware cases, how, and basically how these bad guys have been so successful. But we covered all that, but I just wanted to quickly touch base on the recent Unit 42 ransomware report. We published it a couple of weeks ago. Anna, do you want to start and share a bit about that report? Some of your thoughts around it?
Yeah, I'm really glad and happy to see such a thorough overview being released and being able to share with all the general publics, whoever wants to learn a little bit more about the current status of ransomware, especially comparing what we see in 2021 to 2020, and see how threat actors evolve their tactics, their ambitions. This is a really good opportunity. We organize a lot of really raw data and try to make sure it's the most actionable informations are shared to everyone. So from what we've seen, obviously the threat actors are asking a lot more ransom these days, year to year, and we simply don't see how they're going to stop. So in 2022, 2023, most likely the situation just going to get worsened. So from 2020 to 2021, we see, I think, about 144% of the initial ask. So the ransoms initially being asked are drastically increased. Actors are very aggressively manipulating the victim's psychology. For example, they will ask a lot more and accept a discount because they know the more they ask, the more the victims are willing to pay and think, oh, we got a bigger discount, which is not true, because from the beginning, you shouldn't pay as long as you have really good protection, you have really solid business continuity plan, as long as you have really secure backup systems out there. And those are things truly encouraging victims, whether it's individual or organizations, to start preparing that business continuity plans or having that mentality. It's a matter of time that you will be compromised in small or large scales. In addition to that, we definitely see the proficiency of the collaborations with among threat actors, people who specialize in each functions. There are threat actors focused on developing the core ransomware software, the ransomware as a service portal. And then you have affiliates who really specialize in operation, who identify the intrusion opportunity and then being able to make a lateral movement and then deploy ransomware. In addition to that, we see supporting roles such as let's say the money laundering service, who help them to money launder the ransoms so the threat actor can actually use those money in real life. And we see initial access broker who compromise large amount of systems, especially corporate systems, and list it out in the underground marketplace so the ransomware affiliates can go in and take a shortcut so they don't have to compromise those systems by themselves. They can simply say, oh, this company, they seems rich. Their yearly revenue seems really good. I'm going to buy access to them, right? And I think in 2021, we also start seeing that threat actors trying to lure insider of the company, disgruntled employees, to sell the access to them or collaborate with them, so they can easily infiltrate into systems and escalate their privilege, and then, like really hurt that business going forward. So those are really ambitious attempts, and unfortunately, this seems somewhat successful at the moment. And in addition to that, they also, it allows them, it free up a lot more time and resources for threat actors to, even get better what they're doing. The developers are able to kind of take the opportunity, say, hey, people will take the rest of the business. So let me just focus on, my ransomware. How do I kind of come up with the, a ransomware variants that encrypt even faster? And then for affiliates, it free up their times to think about what's my negotiation technique. And so we also see the multiple extortion techniques being developed. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more in the following.
Yeah, I think, right. So I think, I think a lot of it, we did provide those information in the white paper. And for people who really want to get to the details of this, we have published about it on, I would highly encourage everyone to go and read the white paper. Just quickly, some key numbers there. Anna mentioned about the differences in what happened or what we have seen in 2020 as compared to 2021. We have seen 35 more. There were just hardly 20 odd or probably in less than 20 active ransomware operators back in 2020, but we saw 35 new ones coming up in 2021. So it's huge, and even from a number perspective, Anna mentioned about 144%. It's about, we have seen on an average 900,000, close to 1 million being asked, but now that has gone beyond 2 million. So that's a huge number, right? And one of the key actors here, which we have seen for 2021, is Conti. And Conti is a gang which has done significant damage, right? When we look at the TTPs, a lot of other actors are learning from them, right? Because these guys have been right up, right in front of the other players, because they are using new vulnerabilities. They use Microsoft Exchange. They've used vulnerabilities like the Log4 shell as soon as it was released, like within a few weeks, basically. Like Log4 shell was discovered or reported late November 2021, and in December they started exploiting it. So these guys are very capable and using very new vulnerabilities. As soon as it is out, they are employing it in their TTPs, right? So Conti has done a significant damage. But I also wanted to share some good news about it. There has been a lot of damage, but Interpol, again, Doug, great work from Interpol and your team. We have seen several operations like Operation Cyclone, Operation Quicksand. Operation Cyclone was where an operator from the Klopp gang was targeted. So yeah, some thoughts on you around this whole issue about ransomwares and what is Interpol's take and your work around it.
Thanks, Vicky, and look, and Anna, thanks too for the comments around the report. I thought the report was an excellent expose of the threat and some of the issues and challenges, and really quite interesting in relation to the volume increases. And obviously we expect that to obviously increase further based on what we're seeing. Look, we have done a number of operations, and it's not necessarily Interpol. It's a collective collaboration of many countries as well as private public partners behind these activities. We just try to bring people together. We try to sort of obviously negotiate access and get things done. And yes, there has been quite a bit of work of late, leading into the end of last year in Eastern Europe, where we've seen a number of penetration testers and other types of key players around some of these networks. And And we saw them actually working for a multitude of different ransomware families, which is interesting in itself. So from that perspective. But I guess from an organisational perspective, if you're the subject of a ransomware attack, you've been having problems for a couple of months before the actual deployment of ransomware. That's I think the issue. And whether there's been quite a bit of research in relation to the penetration and access to systems, and generally people are in systems for about 200 days before they're detected. Unfortunately, that detection might happen at the deployment of a ransomware payload into those systems. And that's going to be a very bad day for the CISO, as well as the organisation around business delivery. And some really tough decisions will need to be made around risk reputation, as well as obviously the business viability of that organisation, particularly when it comes to payment of ransom. So I'm I guess been around for too long. Yes, our position is to not pay ransom, but I think from a business and organisational perspective, they've got different drivers and ideas about what they need to do to sustain their business. And obviously, JBS Meats back in over 12 months ago, or just on 12 months ago now, obviously made note that they did pay the ransom, and quite a substantial one in relation to the Rebel ransomware in that case. So I think these are hard decisions. They're hard challenges for organisations to face. As Vicky's quite rightly put in, prevention is the best protection. Obviously thinking about the threat, working through your systems, understanding your legacy processes, patching your systems, software, and the like. Understanding who's networking, who's accessing your controls around a range of different system services and capabilities within your network is absolutely critical to obviously remediate if you are attacked, or prevent that type of access getting into your system. So that being said, I think it's an interesting challenge, but generally, the term cyber kill chain is obviously one. I try to simplify that. There's a penetration, there's a lateral movement, there's an understanding. Some of these networks are starting to use that as an intelligence collection opportunity to understand where the best attack vectors might obviously get the best return. But there's a whole range of other type of activities that can be undertaken prior to the potential deployment of a ransomware software into your system. So, that's critical to understand. Around Conti, Conti's been, I guess, an education for the industry, as well as many countries around the world. Obviously the challenges and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia saw a split and divide within that network when Conti, or the senior leadership of Conti, aligned themselves to the Russian government. And as a result, we saw the Conti leaks that were released around about 160 gigabytes of data, as well as then subsequently we saw the TrickBot leaks, and obviously there's a synergy and connection that's been identified between both those types of issues. So, for us, March, I guess, was Christmas for cybersecurity and I guess the cyber threat response capability, because we had an intimate insight in relation to the operations activities of one of the most significant and current ransomware families. Now, the expectation was that ransomware, the Conti ransomware group, might be done and dusted. Unfortunately, that's not the case. They've claimed responsibility for a ransomware attack in Europe only the last couple of weeks. And I think, we need to be ever vigilant around that and every other ransomware family that's propagating, and understanding that these ransomware families, they share code, they develop and enhance, they try to improve it, they do a whole range of other types of activities through a life cycle of potential opportunities around that. So we need to be ever vigilant. We need to be ever focused and really sort of trying to identify the convergences and divergences that some of these threat actors might take around these types of the actions that they might take moving forward. But yes, a very, very challenging environment. I'm not a big fan of the term ransomware, and people might know that. I'm more about cyber extortion, because there's a multitude of different ways to be able to extort funds out of out of victims and organisations around the world. And I think for us, we need to keep an open mind. We need to try to prevent the penetration, the access in the first instance. If they do get in there, we need to be able to limit their access and their vertical movement across network systems. We need to do a lot of things to prevent, obviously the staging for deployment of some sort of malware into your system that can obviously cause you no end of grief. But look, Vicky, could talk all day on this.
I'm sure. Thanks. Yeah, great insights. And this coming from you is so important, because a lot of times when I'm talking to customers or operational teams, I've been in the operations side of things prior to working for Palo Alto Networks, and some things operationally is still a concern in organizations, even in mature spaces where you talk about initial access. It's so important that organizations try to prioritize that. And like prior to deployment of ransomware, I think you even made a comment that the company might be compromised for a long time prior to the final delivery. And that is so right, because when we look at it, many companies, when they look at, I'll just take an example of Zloader, which is a Zeus banking Trojan, but is now being utilized by ransomware actors to deliver ransomware. But when we look at organizations from an operations perspective, when there's an alert of Zloader, they'll just go and see if the system or their endpoint, maybe an AV, did they detect it? Okay, it's detected and clean. But it could be that it was one of the modules which is detected, but Zloader is a modular malware. There are many other attributes which could be still on the system, but that has not been cleaned. But unfortunately, the bad guy is already there. The system is communicating back and part of the botnet. And this is so key. I think that's a great point. Thanks, Doug, for mentioning that, because I think if companies don't take, and it's important to understand the tactics of these bad guys. What kind of tools are the initial attack vectors, right? So, and these kind of commodity malware is still important for people to further look at, like, are there any suspicious activities after an alert has been discovered? So I think these things are very important from an operational side of things. Great again. Great work on Operation Cyclone for CLOP and Operation Quicksand for Rebel and Sordinokibi. And I think we are still, we have a couple of minutes remaining, but I really wanted to quickly touch base on the cloud side of things, right? There is definitely a lot happening around ransomware, BEC, but in the past 2 years since the pandemic, a lot of organizations have moved to the cloud. And that has, of course, been noticed by cyber criminals alike. And, we have been tracking cloud threats for a while. And we have seen our recent report also highlights that we have seen in the past year, a lot of organizations have moved to the cloud. Unfortunately, while they've moved to the cloud, security has taken a backseat, right? Some of our findings suggest that configurations, the cloud, in-premise solutions may be configured well, but while they have quickly moved to the cloud, configurations and from a security policy side is not up to the mark. There are lots of gaps. There are lots of accounts or identities which are given over permissions. Many of them are having admin permissions where they don't need to. And those percentages have significantly increased. And also some of the findings from Unit 42 suggest that identity and access management is one of the key factors, because this is something which is the initial layer of defense, but unfortunately a lot of times the identity and access management configurations are not up to the mark. So just looking at the numbers here, I think 99% of accounts were over permissive, and 62% of organizations which we have seen have infrastructure exposed publicly, which is not supposed to. So huge amount of infrastructure which is not rightly deployed, And unfortunately, that is because many people are just deploying things and just relying on cloud service providers native. The cloud service providers basic security functionality, but there is no way to automatically check these misconfigurations. So that has significantly resulted in lots of compromise, and there are several actors who are leading the front, and I'll name a few. Number one is Team TNT. They have been in the scene for a long time. The impact from this gang is on, while after, they have a lot of tool sets under their arsenal, and at the end, they have been mining cryptocurrencies, but now they are stealing data and selling it to other criminals, followed by Watchdog, Kinsing, Rock, and 8200. These are some things which we identified, or some groups which have been highlighted, and we have published about it. But really, a key thing which Unit 42 cloud researchers did for the first time is the cloud threat actor matrices, where we were able to map all the attack framework tactics back to each actor's capabilities, right? So again, in this, Team TNT leads the front. So I would highlight these things, but at the same time encourage everyone to read the report. But cloud threats are there. A lot of cyber criminals are taking advantage of it, especially in this time. And I'll just go over to Anna to get her thoughts around it, and then back to you, Doug.
I think this is such a good question, right? And also, if we try to bridge what we see in ransomware and the clouds, there is a predictions that most likely, because the market of ransomware group, as you say, there's 35 new ransomware group being discovered just in 2021. There's a really strong competition there, and we see ransomware group are actively developing new opportunity for themselves, like moving to the Linux systems, moving to the clouds. So we think it's just a matter of time. They're gonna have their eye into the cloud systems. And this is also like one of really obvious example why we need to pay attention to our security postures in the cloud systems, right? And when it comes to clouds, I think, as Witschi mentions, there's still so many things we could do better. For example, overly permissive access that we granted, that people are overusing it. That's one of the things we could have done better without any external threats or pressure. The second things we could do better is the password and cyber hygiene. The passwords reuse policy should be really, really strict. People really need to pay attention, knowing how threat actor can abuse or utilize their old passwords to, attack against them. And in addition to that, weak passwords, just there's no room for a weak password. However, in our most recent research, obviously there's 59% of the users admit they use fairly weak passwords to access their cloud resources. From the threat actors' perspective, we know threat actors already have their eyes in the cloud. For example, they will definitely want to infiltrate into systems and try to figure out how to use the cloud service providers' vulnerability or the stolen credentials to try to access to those resources. It could be used for kind of steal the cloud workload resources, and also doing the crypto mining, such as Moneros. So there are things there, and I wonder from the law enforcement's perspective, what is their biggest concerns and predictions, and what are things we could better do to protect ourselves, Doug?
Thanks, Anna. Look, the cloud, and I'm going to talk, I guess, from a corporate perspective, and I guess from an organizational perspective. The migration from a data center to obviously hosted or cloud services is generally undertaken as a cost-saving perspective, I guess, from organizations, because they're not maintaining infrastructure and process, a whole range of other types of stuff. But you can't do it without being fully aware and understanding the risks and issues. And part of that is obviously having a strong and a good working relationship with the person that's going to host it in the cloud. I think that's part of it, from a security perspective. I think, you've got to test and test and test and test all these issues, work through the challenges and issues around cloud computing to make sure that it's safe and viable for your organisation, and the risks are manageable, and you understand those risks fully across all the services. And as Vicky pointed out, that sometimes things just don't work well with each other, and you need to understand when things don't sort of that work well, that you work through and mitigate those other types of issues. And I think from a global perspective, when we look at this type of stuff, organisations have similar challenges when they actually move into different regions and environments around the world, and they move their business operations into those, because each region has different risks, challenges, and frustrations for organisations. And if you think that you've been operating, I'm just going to be in general, you've been operating in the US and you've got your model down right, it's not going to work when you operate in Africa. And it's the same. If you've got a data center in the US and you move it to the cloud, your business isn't going to operate and have the same risks as what you've been used to in the past. So for organisations, you need to be adaptive. You need to think outside the square in relation to the potential risks and threats that you may be facing as you move throughout these environments, whether it's virtual or whether it's in the physical location, because there are challenges, risks, and threats that you would not have thought about, because even though you might have been in operation for 10, 15, 20 years in the past and think you've got it all covered. You've got to actually bring people in that understand these regions, that understand these environments, and work with them to ensure the viability and business success of your organisation continues. And that's absolutely critical in relation to that. And I think sometimes the boards and the CEOs and the senior executive staff of organisations make a lot of assumptions in relation to these types of things. And we really need to just give them, just reassure them that, yes, proper planning prevents some disasters, but you've got to be open to that type of planning, and you've got to invest in it. If you get something that's a little bit cheaper in relation to your expenditure and operational costs, it might not in the long run be that cheap if you're subject to a ransomware attack.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah, absolutely agree with both of you. And when we look at things which you mentioned, Doug, about different environments, different risks. And a lot of times when we see admins or people who are responsible for the cloud, just talking about cloud in specific, many people who might be seeing this live, you might be thinking that there's a lot mentioned. Anna mentioned you got to look at 1, 2, 3, 4, so many things we got to do. I mean, is it even humanly possible for me to manage it? There are mistakes which can happen. It is really not feasible for an individual to make sure that every configuration deployment goes through in the right manner. So, from our perspective, I think CNSP, which is a cloud native security provider, or CNSP platforms, it's hugely important, because that does a lot of the heavy duty work. That looks at the configurations. It is all automated. It makes sure you are compliant based on compliance in a certain country, a region, right? So really, it shouldn't be an individual or somebody who is responsible of the cloud environment, not his responsibility to ensure all of this is done manually. It should be automated. There's no way it can be done without an automated platform. So cloud native security platforms are hugely important. I think I won't cover too much on the issues we covered in the previous Threats Unpacked session on ISE's infrastructure as code. There are so many templates being used by developers to deploy cloud in the, using just templates which are out there, which are insecure. And this is, again, I'm talking about CNSPs and the issues which Doug and Anna raised. So it should be a technology which makes sure that these issues are scanned before it is being deployed, right? So I think, again, Unit 42 has published the cloud cybersecurity report just a couple of weeks ago. And also we published the AIM report, Identity and Access Management, focusing on cloud threats and some of the actors which I mentioned. Highly recommend everyone to give a read. It's pretty detailed. Again, we don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to close this by really discussing on what can be done, right? I think I already discussed it on the cloud side of things. But when we talk about BEC, we spoke about ransomware. I'll give my thoughts, but I'll just start with Anna first. If you want to, very quickly. I know we don't have much time. Just very, very quick one, Anna. On what can organizations do?
So Unit 42 and me, myself, we've been trying to work with law enforcement for quite some years. And then there's quite some lesson learned. And I want to take a couple minutes to share with everyone. First of all, I think the timings are really important. From the private sector's perspective, I think whenever the law enforcement or public sectors is willing to and ready to take actions, this is the best timing to reach out to private sector and ask for the threat intel enrichments, because whatever we can provide to you, it will be the most useful for you, instead of just kind of a reference. Second, I would say the very mature bilateral feedback loop was really helpful, because that's the only way we can learn from each other and continues to grow and make sure our feedback for each other's is actionable. It will lead us to the next stage, next level of maturity, and make sure things, the information we share can generate some kind of actions. The third, I would say, data exchange agreements. This is really something kind of sit really deep inside of our heart, because we know both of us, public sector and private sector, take the access to the data we have as a privilege, and we take it with full responsibility. So if we have a better agreement in advance and knowing what can be shared, who can access those data, what's the data retention policy, it will really kind of lay the groundwork and make sure both the law enforcement, the policymaker, the private sectors feel more free to exchange data that is useful, potentially useful for each other, and knowing it will not causing or violate any trust for the users or the data owners that like lay on our shoulders. So I think, in short, those are the three things. From a long-term perspective, I think we can work harder and emphasize more to make sure that proactive public-private partnership could function really way better.
Thank you. I think Anna almost gave an example of how Interpol worked with their data sharing agreement. And, we were so proud to be the first one to sign that. But yeah, Interpol's data sharing agreement, that should be an example of what others can do, right? So great. Thanks, Anna. This is, your highlights on data sharing is key for dealing with this kind of cybercrime. And over to you, Doug.
Thanks, Vicky, and thanks, Anna. That's really insightful. For us, I guess I encourage organisations, private public partners and law enforcement agencies to actually take a bit of a leap of faith and actually start to think about sharing your problem. Because the more you share your problem with the right type of people around the various communities that we're all involved in, particularly in the cybercrime, cybersecurity space, the more likelihood you're going to come up with some sort of solution. And if you don't share, you're just going to be battling yourself a challenge that really on your own, you're not going to get anywhere with. And that's the reality of it, and it's going to take you extensively more time. We have seen the sharing of a threat, and Vicky's team at Palo Alto gets our threats when they do emerge. the insights that we get through the private-public partners are very unique. They're based on some really serious research and really serious understandings. And they generally draw on capabilities that law enforcement won't have access to, because we can't afford it. And two, we just haven't got the time to obviously undertake that type of activity. So, this is a global crime type. It needs a global response. We need to share that threat. So that's the first point I'd like to make. Take a leap of faith. The second, leadership. We have to stand up and actually start to drive some of these types of things. We need to sell the problems, the challenges, the risks and the issues to our senior executive and to the company boards and CEOs of these organisations. They need to understand it. We've seen, obviously, last week with the announcement from the Securities Investments Agency in the United States around having cybersecurity skills on all US company boards. That is a positive in relation to this type of threat crime. And I think we need to sort of continue to push those boundaries. And it takes leadership. It takes people that are willing to go the extra mile and do something that hasn't been done before, because we're still not at our end game or ideal game, when the criminals can be very agile, come up with new ideas at the drop of a hat. We need to stay contemporary. We need to sort of define, take control of the problem, and be proactive as opposed to reactive to this type of threat. Because if we're reactive, we're going to be dealing with ransomware attacks, and we're going to be very much depending on those types of issues. And finally, I think it's the planning piece. And this obviously stems out of the leadership. Plan. There's never enough planning in relation to these types of issues. And when you plan, you test, whether it's testing your systems, testing your networks, go through processes, put test plans together, check every system that has any face to the internet or any software. Make sure it's contemporary, make sure it's up to date. I spend so much time talking to organisations that have multiple legacy systems that are maintaining for a certain benefit, but they're also providing an exposure that they just really don't understand the risks that might present. We mentioned templates before. I'm not a big fan of templates, because if they're older than 2 years old, they're not contemporary anymore, because the threat is constantly changing around this space. And we need to have, obviously, template. If you think or just fill in the gap in a template that's dated, it's not contemporary. And really, even the contemporary ones aren't contemporary in themselves, because it's so dynamic, this environment. Think about what you need to do, how you need to get ahead, and how you need to keep organisations protected. And obviously look at how you need to partner with relevant partners across the industry to be able to sort of support you in the worst case scenario. So plan for the worst and hope for the best. That's, I guess, my points, Vicky.
Great ending points. I think, this wouldn't have been put across any better. You mentioned about plan, and this is something which we also try to emphasize, even with Unit 42, when we are looking at ransomware retailers. We are ensuring that a lot of organizations, let's say, even if they have not been hit by a ransomware gang, they need to go through these tabletop exercises, go through the processes. You mentioned about, ensuring that this is done time and again. And this is where we are emphasizing operations and even all organizations to have a proper plan or tabletop exercises on a regular basis, so that when this happens, or on the unfortunate side of things, if anything happens, they are in a better position to deal with it and reduce the damage. And it's about, as you said, being proactive rather than reactive, right? And I can't agree enough about leadership support and really making sure that it's on all levels, whether it is board, even on the board level, they understand that cybersecurity is one of the top things they need to consider. Again, just to end this, I wanted to highlight that organizations need to look at all of these threats from various angles, whether you have an endpoint or whether the security is in the cloud. When we look at these, there is a term called SASE. That means that whether people are working from home or from the office, the level of security in place should be equal. Like, it's not like we are working from office, so we are more secure, but once we are at home, we are exposed to other threats because there are so many people who are working from home. So really, technology is so important now to deter these threats and have it at various levels, whether it is endpoint, network, the cloud, but also at having the standard at all levels in a standardized manner. Basically, as I said, whether you are working from home or office, it should be the same level of security. So without making it too late, I think we discussed so much, and I appreciate your time again, Anna and Doug, especially. Really, it's a pleasure and honor to have us to give us your time. And thanks again for your time. And again, thank you, everyone. Really pleasure to have you with us again. And hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks, Anna. And really, Palo Alto has been a great partner of Interpol, and we really appreciate your ongoing continued support.
Thank you, Doug. Really appreciate it.
Recording stopped.